The golden autumn light filtered through the lace curtains of my grandmother's dining room in Romans-sur-Isère, casting warm shadows across the mahogany table that had witnessed decades of family gatherings. I smoothed my burgundy sweater nervously, feeling the weight of the diamond ring on my finger as I prepared to share the most important news of my 28 years. Victor had proposed just 3 weeks ago during a romantic weekend in Lyon, and I had been bursting to tell my family ever since. The familiar sounds of clinking silverware and animated French conversation filled the air, creating the perfect backdrop for what I hoped would be a moment of pure joy. My heart raced with anticipation as I watched my relatives pass around my grandmother's famous coq au vin, their faces glowing with contentment and wine. This was it, the moment I had dreamed about since I was a little girl playing dress-up in my mother's wedding veil. I cleared my throat gently, waiting for a natural lull in the conversation about my cousin Marie's new job at the local bakery. "Everyone," I began, my voice trembling slightly with excitement, "I have something wonderful to share with you all." The chatter gradually died down as curious eyes turned toward me, and I felt a warm flush spread across my cheeks. My mother's face lit up with anticipation, while my father set down his wine glass with a knowing smile. Even my usually distracted teenage brother looked up from his phone, sensing the importance of the moment. I took a deep breath, savoring this last second before everything would change, before I would officially become a bride-to-be in the eyes of my beloved family. The silence stretched deliciously, filled with expectation and love. "Victor and I are getting married in June," I announced, my voice ringing clear and joyful across the dining room. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. My mother gasped and clapped her hands together. My father's face broke into a proud grin, and my grandmother's eyes filled with happy tears. Congratulations erupted from every corner of the table as chairs scraped against the hardwood floor and family members rushed to embrace me. My cousin Paul raised his wine glass in an impromptu toast, while my sister-in-law peppered me with excited questions about the venue and the dress. The warmth of their love enveloped me like a cozy blanket, and for a moment, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. This was exactly how I had imagined it would be. Pure, unbridled happiness shared with the people who mattered most. As the initial excitement began to settle, and everyone returned to their seats, still buzzing with wedding talk, I noticed my Aunt Marguerite sitting unusually quiet at the far end of the table. She was my father's older sister, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who had never married and seemed to take a particular interest in everyone else's romantic affairs. Her weathered hands were folded carefully in her lap, and there was something unsettling about the way she was studying me with those penetrating gray eyes. While everyone else was asking about wedding colors and guest lists, she remained silent, her thin lips pressed into a line that could have been either disapproval or deep thought. I tried to catch her eye to include her in the celebration, but she seemed lost in some private contemplation that made my stomach flutter with unease. The conversation flowed around me like a river of joy and excitement, but I found myself increasingly distracted by my aunt's strange behavior. My mother was already planning the engagement party, my grandmother was offering her vintage pearl necklace for the ceremony, and my cousins were debating the merits of various wedding venues in the region. Yet through it all, Aunt Marguerite remained conspicuously silent, occasionally sipping her wine but never joining in the animated discussion. There was something almost predatory about the way she watched me, as if she were waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that she was probably just overwhelmed by the news or perhaps feeling melancholy about her own unmarried status. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something was terribly wrong. As dessert was being served, my grandmother's legendary tarte aux pommes, the conversation naturally began to fragment into smaller groups. My mother and sister-in-law were deep in discussion about flower arrangements, while my father and uncle debated the rising cost of weddings in France. It was during this more relaxed moment that Aunt Marguerite finally rose from her chair and made her way around the table toward me. Her movements were deliberate and purposeful, like a cat stalking its prey, and I felt my pulse quicken as she approached. She leaned down close to my ear, her breath smelling of wine and something bitter that I couldn't identify. The rest of the family continued their cheerful chatter, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break over our perfect evening. "You thought he chose you?" she whispered, her voice so low that only I could hear it. The words hit me like ice water, freezing the smile on my face and sending a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn evening. I turned to look at her in shock, but she had already straightened up and was walking back to her seat with the same measured pace, leaving me sitting there with my mouth slightly open and my heart pounding against my ribs. The joyful sounds of my family's celebration suddenly seemed muffled and distant, as if I were hearing them from underwater. What did she mean? What was she trying to tell me? The questions swirled in my mind like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind, and I felt the first crack appear in the perfect happiness I had been savoring just moments before. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and mechanical responses to well-meaning questions about wedding plans. I nodded and laughed at appropriate moments, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying my aunt's cryptic words over and over again. "You thought he chose you?" What could she possibly mean by that? Victor had pursued me relentlessly for months before I finally agreed to go out with him, and our courtship had been everything I could have dreamed of. Romantic dinners, long walks along the Isère River, passionate declarations of love under the stars. He had chosen me, hadn't he? The doubt that my aunt had planted with just 6 words began to grow like a poisonous vine, wrapping itself around my heart and squeezing until I could barely breathe. As I helped clear the dishes and said my goodbyes, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my car keys in the darkness outside my grandmother's house, the cool October air doing nothing to calm the fire that was burning in my chest. The drive back to my apartment in the city center felt endless. Every streetlight and familiar landmark blurred by the tears that I refused to let fall. Victor was waiting for me at home, probably wondering why I was so late returning from what should have been a simple family dinner. How could I face him now, knowing that my aunt's words had planted a seed of doubt that was already beginning to sprout? The radio played softly in the background, some romantic ballad that would have made me smile just hours earlier. But now it felt like a cruel mockery of my confusion. I pulled into my parking space and sat in the silence for several minutes, trying to gather the courage to walk upstairs and pretend that everything was normal. Victor was sprawled on our couch watching a football match when I finally made it through the front door. His dark hair tousled and his shirt sleeves rolled up in that casual way that usually made my heart skip a beat. "How did it go, mon amour?" he called out without taking his eyes off the television screen, his voice warm with genuine interest. Did they love the news as much as I thought they would? I stood frozen in the doorway, studying his profile in the flickering light of the TV, searching for some sign that would either confirm or dispel my aunt's insinuation. He looked exactly the same as he had when I left, handsome, relaxed, completely at ease in our shared space. But now I found myself wondering if I had ever really known him at all, if the man I thought I was going to marry was nothing more than an elaborate illusion. "It was fine," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and hollow even to my own ears. Everyone was very excited. Victor finally turned to look at me, and I saw his brow furrow slightly as he took in my pale complexion and the way I was clutching my purse like a lifeline. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, muting the television and giving me his full attention for the first time since I had walked in. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. Perhaps I had seen a ghost, the ghost of some secret from his past that my aunt seemed to know about. I forced a smile and shook my head, not trusting myself to speak without revealing the turmoil that was churning inside me like a storm-tossed sea. I excused myself to take a shower, hoping that the hot water would wash away the anxiety that clung to me like a second skin. But as I stood under the steaming spray, my aunt's words echoed in my mind with increasing intensity. "You thought he chose you?" The question mark at the end of that sentence was like a dagger, suggesting that there was so much more to the story than I knew. I tried to think back to the beginning of our relationship, searching for clues that I might have missed. Victor had been charming and persistent, yes, but had there been something desperate about his pursuit? Something that suggested he was running from something or someone else? The more I thought about it, the more uncertain I became about everything I thought I knew about our love story. When I emerged from the bathroom wrapped in my terry-cloth robe, Victor was waiting for me in our bedroom with a concerned expression on his face. "Solène, what's wrong?" he asked, reaching out to touch my arm. "You've been acting strange ever since you got home, and I can tell something is bothering you." His touch, which usually brought me comfort and warmth, now felt like a brand against my skin. I pulled away instinctively, and I saw hurt flash across his features before he quickly masked it with confusion. "Did something happen at dinner? Did someone say something to upset you?" The genuine worry in his voice made me want to collapse into his arms and forget all about my aunt's cryptic warning. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to discover something that would change everything. "Victor," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "is there anything about your past that you haven't told me? Anything about previous relationships or family connections?" I watched his face carefully as I spoke, looking for any telltale sign of guilt or recognition. For just a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his dark eyes, a shadow of panic or perhaps regret, but it was gone so quickly that I couldn't be sure if I had imagined it. "What kind of question is that?" he asked, his voice taking on a slightly defensive tone. "Of course I've told you about my past. You know about my ex-girlfriend in Paris, and the woman I dated briefly in Marseille. Why are you asking me this now?" But even as he spoke, I noticed that he wouldn't quite meet my eyes, and his hands were fidgeting with the edge of our comforter in a way that suggested nervousness. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with unspoken questions and half-formed suspicions. I wanted desperately to believe him, to accept his explanations and return to the blissful ignorance I had enjoyed just hours earlier. But my aunt's words had opened a door in my mind that I couldn't seem to close, and doubt was pouring through like water through a broken dam. "I just want to make sure we're being completely honest with each other," I said finally, my voice stronger now, despite the trembling in my hands. "Marriage is a big step, and I need to know that there are no secrets between us." Victor's expression softened, and he reached for me again, this time successfully pulling me into his arms. "Of course there are no secrets," he murmured against my hair. "I love you, Solène. You're the only woman I want to spend my life with." But even as he held me close, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something back. That night, I lay awake long after Victor had fallen asleep beside me, his steady breathing a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my aunt's knowing expression and heard those 6 words that had shattered my perfect evening. "You thought he chose you? What did she know that I didn't? And more importantly, why had she chosen that moment to plant this seed of doubt in my mind?" I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, watching the shadows dance across the plaster as cars passed by on the street below. Tomorrow, I decided, I would have to find the courage to dig deeper, to ask the questions that might destroy everything I thought I knew about my relationship. But tonight, I would lie here in the arms of the man I loved and try to hold on to the last moments of my innocence before the truth, whatever it might be, changed everything forever. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching the storm clouds that had gathered in my heart overnight. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, but I knew I wouldn't be able to concentrate on spreadsheets and client meetings with my aunt's words still echoing in my mind like a broken record. Victor had left early for his job at the engineering firm, kissing me goodbye with what seemed like extra tenderness, as if he sensed that something fundamental had shifted between us. I sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring out at the rain-soaked streets of Romans-sur-Isère and trying to summon the courage to do what I knew I had to do. The phone felt impossibly heavy as I picked it up and dialed my aunt's number, my fingers trembling as I pressed each digit. I had to know what she meant, even if the truth destroyed everything I held dear. "Marguerite speaking," came my aunt's crisp voice after 3 rings, as if she had been expecting my call. There was something almost smug in her tone that made my stomach clench with apprehension. "Solène, ma chérie," she continued before I could even identify myself. "I wondered when you would call. You looked quite pale when you left last night." The casual way she mentioned my distress made it clear that her whispered comment had been entirely deliberate, not some wine-induced slip of the tongue as I had desperately hoped. I gripped the phone tighter, feeling like I was about to step off a cliff into an abyss of unknown depth. "Aunt Marguerite," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk. What did you mean last night when you said what you said? The silence that followed was pregnant with unspoken secrets, and I could almost hear her calculating how much to reveal. Ah, ma petite, she sighed, and I could picture her settling into her favorite armchair with that self-satisfied expression she wore when she knew something others didn't. I suppose it's time you knew the truth. But not over the phone. Some conversations require looking into someone's eyes. Can you come to my house this afternoon? The ominous tone of her words sent ice through my veins, but I knew I had no choice. I'll be there at 2, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. And Aunt Marguerite? Please, just tell me, is it very bad? Her pause lasted an eternity before she answered. That depends on how much you value the truth over comfortable lies, ma chérie. I'll see you this afternoon. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in my hand as if it were a snake that had just bitten me. The hours until our meeting crawled by with agonizing slowness, each minute feeling like an hour as I paced around our apartment like a caged animal. I tried to distract myself with household chores, but my hands shook too much to fold laundry properly, and I nearly dropped a plate while attempting to wash dishes. Every surface in our home seemed to mock me with memories of happier times. The couch where Victor and I had spent countless evenings watching movies, the dining table where he had first told me he loved me, the bedroom where we had planned our future together. I found myself studying our framed photographs with new eyes, searching for clues I might have missed. In every picture, Victor's smile seemed genuine, his arm around me possessive and loving. But now I wondered if I had been seeing only what I wanted to see, blind to some deeper truth that everyone else apparently knew. My aunt's house sat on a quiet street lined with plane trees, their autumn leaves creating a carpet of gold and brown that crunched under my feet as I walked up her garden path. The familiar blue shutters and ivy-covered walls that had always seemed welcoming now felt ominous, as if the house itself was keeping secrets. Marguerite answered the door before I could even knock, her sharp eyes taking in my pale complexion and the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, stepping aside to let me enter. "Good. That means you're finally ready to hear what I have to tell you." She led me into her sitting room, where she had already prepared tea and arranged herself in her throne-like armchair. The afternoon light filtering through her lace curtains cast intricate shadows on the Persian rug, creating patterns that seemed to shift and dance like the truth I was about to learn. "Before I begin," my aunt said, pouring tea with steady hands while mine trembled in my lap, "I want you to know that I debated whether to tell you this for weeks after I heard about your engagement. Part of me thought it might be better to let sleeping dogs lie." She handed me a delicate china cup that I accepted gratefully, needing something to do with my hands. "But then I realized that you deserve to know the truth before you walk down that aisle. What you do with this information is entirely up to you." The formal way she spoke, as if she were delivering a legal verdict, made my heart pound so hard I was sure she could hear it. I took a sip of tea, tasting nothing but the metallic flavor of fear, and nodded for her to continue. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back now. "Your Victor," she began, and the way she said "your" made it sound like a question, "was engaged before, not to some stranger in Paris or Marseille, as I'm sure he's told you, but to someone much closer to home." My cup rattled against its saucer as my hands began to shake uncontrollably. "Who?" I whispered, though part of me already knew the answer would be devastating. "Your cousin Isabel," she said simply, watching my face carefully as the words hit me like physical blows. "They were engaged for 8 months, 3 years ago. The wedding was planned for September, invitations sent, dress bought, church booked. And then, 2 weeks before the ceremony, he disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye, nothing. He simply vanished from her life as if their entire relationship had been a dream." The room seemed to spin around me as I processed this information, my mind struggling to reconcile the Victor I knew with the man my aunt was describing. "But that's not the worst part," Marguerite continued relentlessly, her voice cutting through my shock like a blade. "Isabel was devastated naturally. She had a complete breakdown, spent months in therapy, couldn't work for nearly a year. The family rallied around her, helped her rebuild her life piece by piece. And just when she was finally starting to heal, just when she was beginning to trust again," she paused, letting the suspense build like a master storyteller. Victor reappeared, not to apologize or explain, but to pursue you. He had been watching our family, Solène. He knew exactly who you were, knew you were Isabelle's cousin. And he chose you deliberately, as if you were some kind of consolation prize, or perhaps even revenge. The words hit me like a physical assault, each revelation more devastating than the last. I felt the last vestiges of my perfect love story crumbling around me like a house of cards in a hurricane, leaving me sitting in the ruins of everything I had believed to be true. I don't remember leaving my aunt's house or driving home through the rain-slicked streets of Romans-sur-Isère. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car in our apartment building's parking garage, my hands still gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. The concrete walls seemed to close in around me as my aunt's words echoed in my mind with devastating clarity. Victor had been engaged to my cousin Isabelle. He had abandoned her at the altar and then deliberately pursued me, knowing exactly who I was and what it would mean. The man I thought had chosen me out of love had actually selected me as some twisted form of revenge or replacement. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning with a mixture of betrayal, humiliation, and rage that threatened to overwhelm me completely. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed all the signs that must have been there? The elevator ride to our third-floor apartment felt like ascending to my own execution. Each floor that passed brought me closer to the confrontation I knew was inevitable, the moment when I would have to look into Victor's eyes and demand the truth. My hands shook so violently that I could barely get the key into the lock, and when I finally managed to open the door, I found him exactly where I had left him that morning, sprawled on our couch. But this time he was reading a book instead of watching television. "You're home early," he said, looking up with that smile that had once made my heart race but now made my stomach turn. "Feeling better?" The casual normalcy of his greeting, the way he acted as if nothing had changed, made me want to scream. How could he sit there so calmly when our entire relationship was built on lies and deception? "We need to talk," I said, my voice coming out stronger and more controlled than I felt. Something in my tone must have alerted him to the gravity of the situation, because his smile faded immediately, replaced by a wariness that I had never seen before. He set his book aside and sat up straighter, his dark eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me feel exposed and vulnerable. "What's wrong?" he asked, but there was something calculated about the question, as if he were already preparing his defenses. I remained standing in the doorway, needing the distance between us, needing to see his full reaction when I finally confronted him with the truth. The afternoon light streaming through our windows cast long shadows across the room, and I realized that this might be the last time I would ever see this space as our home. "Tell me about Isabelle," I said simply, watching as the color drained from his face like water from a broken dam. The book slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights, his mouth opening and closing without any sound emerging. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, his expression hardened into something I had never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost predatory. "What about Isabelle?" he asked, but his voice lacked the confusion it should have held if he were truly innocent. Instead, there was resignation in his tone, as if he had always known this moment would come. The man sitting on our couch suddenly seemed like a stranger, and I wondered how I had ever thought I knew him at all. "You know exactly what about Isabelle," I replied, my voice gaining strength with each word. "My cousin Isabelle, who you were engaged to 3 years ago. The woman you abandoned 2 weeks before your wedding. The woman whose life you destroyed before you decided to pursue me." I watched as each accusation hit its mark, saw the way his jaw tightened and his hands clenched into fists. "Did you think I would never find out? Did you think you could just pretend that part of your life never existed?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of rain against our windows and the thundering of my own heartbeat. I could see him calculating, trying to decide whether to continue lying or finally tell me the truth. The fact that he had to think about it told me everything I needed to know about the man I had agreed to marry. "How did you find out?" he asked finally, and the question confirmed every terrible thing my aunt had told me. Not a denial, Not an explanation, just a cold inquiry about how his deception had been discovered. The clinical way he asked it, as if my pain were merely an inconvenience to be managed, made me realize that I had never really known him at all. "Does it matter?" I shot back, my voice rising with anger and hurt. "The question is why, Victor? Why did you lie to me? Why did you pursue me knowing who I was? And why did you think you could build a marriage on such a foundation of deception?" I could feel tears threatening to spill over, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down, not when he had already taken so much from me. Victor stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, like a man approaching a dangerous animal. "Solène, please," he began, his voice taking on a pleading quality that I had never heard before. "Let me explain. It's not what you think. Yes, I was engaged to Isabelle, but that was a mistake. I realized I didn't love her, that I was just going through the motions because it was expected of me." He took a step toward me, but I held up my hand to stop him, needing the physical distance to think clearly. "When I met you, everything changed. You were nothing like her. You were vibrant and passionate and real. I fell in love with you for who you are, not because of any connection to my past." But even as he spoke, I could hear the rehearsed quality of his words, as if he had been preparing this speech for months, waiting for the day when his lies would finally catch up with him. "You're lying," I said flatly, surprised by how calm I sounded when inside I felt like I was dying. "You knew exactly who I was from the moment we met. You pursued me deliberately, knowing I was Isabelle's cousin. What I can't figure out is why. Was it revenge? Some sick game? Or did you just think I would be easier to manipulate than she was?" The hurt in my voice was unmistakable now, and I saw something flicker across his features that might have been genuine remorse. But it was too little, too late. The damage was done, the trust was broken, and I finally understood that the man I thought I loved had never really existed at all. He was just a character Victor had created to win my heart, a carefully constructed facade designed to hide the truth about who he really was. As I stood there looking at him, I felt the last pieces of my heart shatter into fragments so small they could never be put back together again. Victor's face crumpled as the weight of his deception finally caught up with him, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely vulnerable. "You want the truth?" he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Fine. Yes, I knew who you were. Yes, I pursued you because you were Isabelle's cousin, but not for revenge, for redemption." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I had once found endearing but now seemed pathetic. "I thought if I could make you love me, if I could prove that I was capable of real love, then maybe I could forgive myself for what I did to her. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about redemption and became about you. I do love you, Solène, even if it started as something else." I stared at him for a long moment, feeling nothing but emptiness where my heart used to be. "Love built on lies isn't love at all," I said quietly, pulling the engagement ring from my finger with hands that had finally stopped shaking. The diamond caught the afternoon light one last time before I placed it on the coffee table between us, where it sat like a small, glittering accusation. "I'm going to stay at my sister's tonight. I need you gone by tomorrow." I turned toward the door, then paused without looking back. "And Victor, stay away from my family. All of us. You've done enough damage for one lifetime." As I walked out of our apartment for the last time, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just heartbreak, but relief. The truth had set me free, even if freedom felt like falling into an abyss.